Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Sideline Shenanigans podcast today with Jacob Maggard and
Brendan or Julio.
heck yeah, he's on here with us. You obviously probably remember him from last year if you watched any of the episodes. He is our resident Alabama fan, so you'll hear a little bit of that Alabama bias leak through here and there. I'm just kidding with you, Julio, but we'll be moving into our first segment. Of course, before I do that, I want to say, hey, everybody, leave a like, subscribe, follow along. It helps a ton. Leave comments, anything like that. That always helps kind of get the channel out there, but at the same time, it gives us, you know, yeah, some support, but also it gives us ideas. If you leave comments, we know what y'all want us to cover or whatever. But moving into this segment, we're going to do to start. We're going to do it quick and easy. It's going to be our Heisman and our playoff predictions. So technically, just who we think's going to win a national championship, and maybe we could say who we think they're playing. But I'm just going to pick the champion, and I'll go ahead and start it with my Heisman pick. I'm going to say that I think Cade Klubnik, quarterback Clemson. I think he's a big time threat to win that award this year. I think he showed last year how much better he got in 1 year. So, what can another year of college football do for him? The receiving core is going to get even better. He didn't lose much, and other than losing Maffa in the backfield, this team returns a ton of their talent. I think they're coached really well. I think they have a schedule that if he can win the big games and go undefeated, you're going to say, man, this guy was the reason they did that. So, for all those same reasons, Julio, I think you got the same pick at Heisman.
Yeah, I think he's got a favorable schedule. Besides this week, I think he's going to have a tough matchup, and I think that's going to, depending on how he plays, I really think he's probably your go-to favorite to win this.
Yeah, I would agree with you a ton. Like I said, I think that it definitely leans for him to be able to go undefeated, and if he does that, it's hard to not give it to him, especially if they're a top 3 to 5 team in the country, and he would be the main reason for that. And then moving into our dark horse pick, Julio, I'll go ahead and let you do that first, and this is why I said a little bias was going to leak through.
I think personally it's going to be Ty Simpson with the receiving core we got now. I think, if he can, do a lot better than what Milroe did last year, I think he has a shot because he's more of a pocket passer. And honestly, with Ryan Williams and Isaiah Horton and Jeremy Bernard, I think he could put up some big numbers depending on how he plays that.
Yeah, exactly. If you get the guy that you thought he was going to be when he committed to Alabama, there's definitely a world where that can happen. And that's why it's a dark horse. It's a guy that isn't supposed to win the award, but has a chance. And I'm going to be going on the other side of that and saying it's a quarterback award. So I think that's probably a better pick, but I'm going to go with a running back. And I'm just going to say Jeremiah Love because I think if you talk about just pure talent and what they can do on the field, he's probably my favorite player to watch in college football right now, him or Jeremiah Smith, just because they're both freaks and do some unbelievable stuff on the field. But Love was doing stuff last year in the playoffs with a bum knee, and he literally hurdled a defender on one leg, landed on the same leg, and then runs up and down the field. And then, of course, you saw the effort he gives on the goal line, the plays he made in the playoffs. And I would love to see him back in those big moments because he always seems to shine there. And it would be really hard for a running back to win it because Genty didn't win it this year, and he just had probably the second best season or third best season ever as a running back. So I don't think it's going to happen, but I think it would be really cool if it did. And then leading into our last thing here, we're going to be talking about our national champion pick. I'm just going to give my champion. I'm not going to give the game itself, but my champion is going to follow along with my Heisman winner, and that's going to be the Clemson Tigers. I think that Clemson is going to be really, really good this year. You let Dabo Swinney dip into the portal, and what can happen? Because we saw how good they can be with no portal. They were in the playoffs last year, and they didn't use the transfer portal. So this is a team that they add in a big group of guys that can make a difference that are older players, juniors and seniors, and that's going to be a big difference to me for what that roster will be. And also, like you said, they can kind of run the table during the ACC play where they're probably the best team by a good bit, and that gives them a chance to set themselves up nicely for the playoffs. And when they come in there and they're going to be a highly ranked team, I like Clemson to win it all this year.
I'll pick Alabama. I know it's biased, but I think they have honestly one of the most talented rosters in college football. Their defense is arguably the best defense in college football. And like I said, depending on how Ty Simpson plays, he could, throw for 3,200 yards and they still go undefeated or lose a game or two and run the table in the playoffs.
Yeah, again, I don't disagree with you at all. When it comes to composite talent, we were just talking about talent on a roster. We were looking at the composite rankings, and that is just basically your star ratings due to players. And they're number one, and they have been number one for a long time. They will have that talent come in and out every year. And even when they lose big transfers, they get guys that are better back, and they have 5 stars waiting in to come in and play for them. And again, they kept a lot of talent. They kept their best receiver from last season, and he's still got another year after this one. They kept a really good running back who is injured to start the season, but again, he can make a difference when he returns. They probably have the best fronts in college football potentially with their O line, D line, And they also have Deontay Lawson, and we'll talk about him a little bit later when we talk about that game. But that's a guy that can contribute on defense in a big way. So yeah, they definitely have a good enough roster to do it. I'm not as high on them. I obviously think that they are going to be good, though. If you saw my preseason rankings, I have them in my top 10. So I do think they're really good. I just don't think they're championship good. But again, like you said, if Ty Simpson, figures it out and becomes that guy he was supposed to be, that roster is definitely talented enough to win something, win big this year. Moving on to our first week of college football. This is obviously the week to get the most excited for, even though week zero was fun and it was an introduction to college football. We didn't have as many big games. This week we have three top 10 matchups. And you don't see that very often in week one because a lot of teams don't schedule super tough to start the season because you kind of want to, have a game to warm you up and get you going. But at the same time, if you're these top 10 teams, you get a lot of credit for playing this tough of a game early on, and it can really help you when they start looking at your schedule and your wins and losses at the end of the year. So we'll see what the committee does this year and how much they respect these teams for playing in these super tough games early on. Obviously, we're opening up with a ranked team in the Boise State Broncos playing against the South Florida Bulls. They've obviously built this team up to be a competitive roster this year. In USF, again, Byron Brown at quarterback is probably the star to mention when you talk about this team. And on the other side for Boise State, you're talking about quarterback Maddox Madsen. And that's where we'll start looking at this Boise State roster that returns Matt Lauder at tight end, who was incredible last year, and Latrell Caples at receiver, who was awesome last year. And you're seeing that this team is full of a lot of continuity. You don't see many transfers listed here. And when you look at this roster, it's a team that they were running the table with Genty. I think they can still be really good without him. They do have Malik Sherrod. They have Sire Gaines. If you watched Sire Gaines last year, he had a lot of potential and faced some injuries. I do expect a ton from this team. I still think they're going to be really, really good. I think they probably are the best group of five team. And again, Julio, if you want to talk more about those backs, I know you've done a little bit of digging on their stats.
Yeah, Malik Sherrod, he's from Fresno. He appeared in 4 games last year and had 60 carries and 196 yards, and he missed the rest of the season. And Sierra Gaines, he had 20 carries for 156 yards and a touchdown. Obviously, he was behind Genty, who was
Yeah,
one of the greatest running backs, had one of the greatest running back seasons of all time. So, I mean, there's not really much you can do there.
no, yeah, there's not a lot of work to happen whenever you're playing behind that guy. And then again, you look at this defense. One of the big returners is Jaden Virgin Morgan. Of course, was one of their star edge rushers last year. They did lose their edge off the other side, but you expect that he'll be really, really good coming off the edge again this year. And then you're just looking at a group of guys on the back end that have played together. You do see a few transfers here, but in general, a lot of older players, and that really, really is a good thing in Group of Five football to have an old roster that's experienced, and they are going to be coached really well because Boise State has consistently been one of the best Group of Five teams for as long as I've been alive. So I expect them to compete again. We'll go over and look at this offense for USF. Of course, I already talked about their quarterback in Byron Brown. He is a monster. He is a guy that could very easily be the best quarterback in the group of five. That's how good this kid is. Julio, I know you had some nightmares watching him play against Bama a few years ago, and some of the plays he was able to make against Bama. That is arguably was the best defense in college football, or one of the best, and he was making those kinds of plays and gave them a shot in that game. And so, again, he's a really, really good player. It's what can the guys around him do. Julio, talk about them running backs.
First, you got Cartavius Norton, and he's from Iowa State. He had 129 attempts last year, 525 yards, 7 touchdowns, averaging about 6.5 yards a carry. I mean, he's probably gonna, he could play a big factor in this game. And your backup is Sam Franklin. He only had 18 carries for 132 yards.
Yeah, limited carries for him. Again, a guy that may be a difference maker, but you're talking about Cartavius Norton being the guy in the backfield. Both of these dudes are senior transfers, so they're coming in with the ability to maybe revitalize their career for their last season. But also, it's again, what did I talk about? You want an aged player on your offense and your defense in the group of five. The more experience these guys have, usually the better. And then you dive down to this defense. Again, you're looking at a lot of older players. Once again, juniors and seniors, some even graduate transfers, multiple actually across this defensive line. So you're looking at depth at a lot of these positions, and it's depth in older players. So they have experience in college football, like I said before. Again, I like this matchup a ton. It's a really fun one, actually, to start the week when we talk about big time games. But we'll go back here. We'll make our pick. Julio, I'll go ahead and let you start. Who's going to be your pick in this one?
I'm gonna take Boise State.
Yeah, and I'm gonna be right there with you. I'm gonna go Boise State as well. I think again the continuity of the roster. I think Boise State overall they're coached really well, probably the best in the group of five. And again, one of the cool things in college football is home field atmospheres and where you play at. Well, they play in Raymond James Stadium, and that's not their home stadium, and they won't have one until 2026. So USF doesn't get that crowd experience, doesn't get that college experience, and so yeah, Boise's going on the road, but they're going on the road to an NFL stadium. It's just not the same. I think Boise does bring back a lot of talent, and I think Boise will win this one. And again, that's starting off our first pick going into week one of the college football season. We got the Boise State Broncos winning. Moving on to our second game here. Another really fun one. This is two teams that, again, Auburn expects to be able to compete in the SEC this year. Probably not going to be one of the top tier teams in the conference, but they're looking to bounce back after a really rough year last year. And then Baylor, who could win the Big 12. That's how good they are. You saw how good they were down the stretch last year. They have one of the best quarterbacks in the conference, and they have one of the best head coaches in the conference. But we'll start off by diving into this Auburn roster. Kind of the big news with them is Jackson Arnold transfers in, and he was not good last year. Just to say it plain, he had a bad year. He didn't look good in the system he was playing in, but he does have a lot of potential to be very good. He's also, again, an experienced player. He's played a lot of college football. Also, his receiving core has a massive upgrade. You're talking about throwing the ball to Cam Coleman and Eric Singleton, who was the number one transfer receiver in the portal. This is a very good receiving core. On top of that, you got a really good, solid group of defensive players on the other side of the ball. But you look at their offensive line, and one of the big transfers is Xavier Chaplin coming over from Virginia Tech, a guy that I really liked. They paid him $2 million to go play left tackle, so they expect a lot out of him. He is really good. As a Tech fan, if you're an Auburn fan paying attention to me, I loved him. He was really good. I trusted him. He never really got Kyron sacked, so that's always a good thing. It does suck to lose him, and he definitely can make a difference on this offensive line, being the backside protector for Jackson Arnold, who obviously needs a little bit of help to kind of kickstart him again. Julio, you got some on their halfbacks.
We got Damari Allison. He had 52 carries last year for 276 yards and three touchdowns on 5 yards a carry. And at RB2, you got Jeremiah Cobb, 29 carries and 142 yards.
Yeah, again, it's not a lot of production. Like you've said before with the last couple teams, we're looking at a lot of running back rooms that are kind of bare because they've lost the guy that was the starter last year, the superstar. And we'll learn more as we watch games this year because we don't really know who the actual starter will be. This is just kind of a predictive depth chart, so we're not 100% sure. But that's the guys that we mentioned name-wise. And then you dive down and look at this defense. And this is actually the opposite of what I've said with the group of five. You've got a lot of younger guys here. You got a bunch of sophomores you see listed as starters. And again, predictive, but if there's a lot of sophomores starting here, what are the odds these are guys that they've recruited that they've actually had some pretty good recruiting classes? We talked about those composite rankings. Auburn was sitting at 12 in the composite rankings of talent. So they've got a lot of 4 and 5 stars on this roster that can definitely win football games for them. And we'll see what happens because it is going to be interesting when you look at the overall roster for Auburn and how much better can they be from last year where turnovers was the thing that plagued them. Then we go look at the Baylor team that, again, I like this Baylor team. Dave Aranda is an awesome head coach, knows how to win football games, and they have Sawyer Robertson playing quarterback. That is a big, big story for them is Dave Aranda knows how to win games, and Sawyer Robinson is a beast. I do believe that this receiving core can help him out. Of course, Kobe Prentice sitting up there, you know that name. He obviously can be a big difference maker for Sawyer Robinson. And again, what will he do? I do like Michael Trigg, their tight end here. He's also really good. I expect a lot of him. And it's going to be, can this team repeat the success they had in the second half of last year? Or will they look like that first half team that come out really slow? And honestly, they looked horrible. They didn't win a lot of games. Again, there's the flip flop. Either side, what are you going to get? I think that Baylor is going to start hot, and that might be something you hear me say when I make my pick in a couple minutes. But Julio, go ahead and give us some info on those halfbacks.
We got Bryson Washington last year. He had 175 carries for 1,028 yards and 12 rushing touchdowns, averaging about 6 yards a carry. And then you got RB2 Dawson Pendergrass. He had 121 carries, 671 yards, six rushing touchdowns, and about 5.5 yards per carry.
So yeah, you're talking about monsters in the backfield. You talk about a kind of a two-headed combo of running backs that are going to kind of push forward and be the guy for them. They didn't lose their production. They kept their guys. And so it's a lot different than the other teams we've looked at, including Auburn, who's on the other side dealing with a running back situation where they don't really know who's going to be the guy. Baylor has the continuity of knowing their quarterback, knowing their halfbacks, and again, it's super, super helpful to have all that. I do expect that this team will be really good this year, and I am much higher on them than I was last year. I'm also much higher on them due to what they did in the second half. So, going in to make our pick here, I'll start us off. I'm going to say the Baylor Bears get it done in Waco, Texas, get a huge win over an SEC school who's expecting to be really good this year. And I actually don't think that that derails Auburn's season. I think this is a really tough game to open the year in Baylor after the success they had at the end of the year. Give me Dave Aranda and the Baylor Bears.
I'll take Baylor as well. I think that Auburn won't be able to stop their running game or maybe even their passing game. Adding Kobe Prentice and Sawyer Robertson, I think Baylor wins this one by a touchdown.
Yeah, good prediction there. And again, it's in Waco. That makes it even harder. I mentioned the home field advantage. They get it whenever they play in their home stadium. Moving to our third game, and this is probably the one I'm most anticipating before we get to Saturday and Sunday slate, and that's Georgia Tech versus Colorado. You've already heard me make a really hot take on Georgia Tech. I said they were going to be playing in the ACC championship game, so clearly I got to have them winning this one. You know my pick before I even get into it, but obviously we're going to dive into these rosters and dive into these teams. But first of all, going to take a look over at the Georgia Tech offense. And this one is one you definitely know the continuity of this roster's put together because you're talking about a guy in Haynes King and Jamal Haynes. And Julio, I'll let you talk about him in just a second. But the Haynes and Haynes combo was one of mine and Dalton's favorite things to say last year when we watched this team play. They are really fun together. Haynes King, probably one of the most dynamic rushers in college football, if not the best on the ground. And then you look at this receiving core, and they lost Eric Singleton. But they got Eric Rivers, and Eric Rivers was incredible at Florida International University last year. One of the best receivers in the entire country, was highly sought after, and it just shows you the system that Georgia Tech is building is so much different than what they did even 15 years ago when they were purely triple option football team. They're now passing the ball a lot, and Malik Rutherford's really good. Eric Rivers is really good, and again, I love this roster. Again, one of my favorites in college football, and one of the teams I'm really, really high on. Julio, if you want to talk about the star back and Jamal Haynes.
Yeah, Jamal Haynes last year had 169 carries, 944 yards, and over 5.5 yards per carry and 9 rushing touchdowns. And then at RB2, you got Malachi Halsey. He was a transfer from the University of Pennsylvania, and he ran for 1,192 yards last year on 191 carries.
Yeah, really good at UPenn. Of course, we have a buddy we used to play with playing up there, so maybe we can ask him a few questions about how good Hosley was. But of course, you're talking about a dynamic duo in the backfield already, and then you add in a third guy if Hosley can be as good as he looks like he could potentially be. Again, you don't really know how that football will transfer over from a smaller level to the big level, but again, if he had 1,000 yards, he was obviously legit, and that helps him a ton. Can kind of give Haynes a couple breaks here and there, and then of course Haynes King will do his thing on his legs as well, which will give Jamal Haynes a break here and there. And then again, you look at this defense; it's a really old defense, all juniors and seniors starting in this defense. So a lot of work that they've done together, and I love their coach and Brent Key, phenomenal head coach. I think he's one of the brightest minds in the game right now. I think he's coming up as probably one of the best coaches in the ACC. This is his real season to kind of show what they can be at their best. Then on the other side, we look at a Colorado team that they look a lot different. This team looks completely different. If you knew Deion Sanders and you knew Colorado, you knew Travis Hunter and you knew Shador Sanders. That is completely different. That has changed. And this year you're looking at Liberty transfer quarterback Caden Salter, and then maybe freshman Julian Lewis touches the field some. But again, Caden Salter is listed as a starter and was announced as the starter by Deion himself. And then, of course, you look at this receiving core. It's a lot of guys that didn't play last year. Jimmy Horn is gone. Again, Travis Hunter is gone. They haven't really Censor Brown transferring in, but you're looking at a younger guy in Miller, sophomore, and then of course Marion Miller. You got the Miller and Miller combo there at the receiver spot. But again, it'll be interesting to see what they get out of those guys. Can they be as good as a Jimmy Horn and Travis Hunter was? I don't know. It's going to be really hard to produce that. But of course, another big thing with Colorado is their struggle to run the ball. has been really bad. They just can't run the football at all. So this year, that's something that's got to get going. Julio, what guys down there can maybe make that happen for them?
You got Michael Welch. He had 43 carries for 186 yards and four rushing touchdowns, averaging about 4 yards a carry last year. And you got DeKalion Taylor, transfer from Incarnate Word, sorry, and had 152 carries, 909 yards.
Yeah, and that's maybe the guy that makes the difference for them. Maybe they do bring in an incarnate word transfer, who, of course, if you know who else was an incarnate word transfer, Cam Ward. So they've produced talent from this level up to this level, and they've obviously been very, very good. So what are the odds that that happens again? Maybe Colorado nails another transfer portal pickup because that's kind of how they built their entire roster is through the transfer portal. And then, of course, you look over at this defense. There's some names here that you'll recognize from last year's roster, but truthfully, not much. Tons of transfers. That is how Dion builds his teams. That's how he kind of told us he was going to build his teams. He has a recruiting class that's sitting around the mid 80s right now. And he said, I'm not looking to recruit 18-year-old kids. I'm looking to go get my 20, 21-year-olds that are looking to go play in the league, and I'm going to be like a one and done football university where I just bring in talent every year and see what we can do with them. We're going to see if it works because last year they went 8-4 and they had a pretty good season overall. They had a lot of wins. And they did get it kind of upset down the stretch, but they were just in that Big 12 competition to potentially play in the championship game. So maybe his style of building a roster will work in today's college football. Going to make a pick in this one, Julio. You kind of already know what I'm doing, so I'll go ahead and let you say yours first.
I think it's going to be Georgia Tech. I don't think they'll be able to stop the Haynes and Haynes combo. I think it'll be, Colorado won't be able to run the ball, and you don't know what they're going to have with Salter or this receiving core or even their defense. It's not going to be, it's a completely different team. So give me Georgia Tech.
Yep, and I'm on the same wave as you, and it's not really because of how much I dislike Colorado. I actually do think they can have some success this year, and I do think Dion is a good coach. I think he has a pretty good staff around him, but I do agree with you. They're running the ball is a big time issue. They don't have the playmakers on the outside like they did last year, and I do think Caden Salter is a good quarterback, but he is not Haynes King. And he does not have the weapons that Haynes King has at his disposal. So I'm going to take Georgia Tech, and I'm going to take them actually in a pretty big win here. I think they'll win by 2 scores. But I do like Georgia Tech here a ton, and we're both going opposite of what ESPN analytics tell you to do. So maybe we're saying screw the analytics today. Moving on to our fourth game on the schedule. This is the big one. I mean, this is the big one. If you're talking about any game in college football this weekend, you're talking about the defending national champions kind of being disrespected here when they ranked them third and not first. Of course, they lost a ton of talent, talking about specifically their halfback duo, their quarterback, most of their defense. It's a lot to replace. But if you know Ohio State, you know that they have the pieces to replace that. They also have their best players still on this team in Caleb Downs and Jeremiah Smith. And on the other side, the Texas Longhorns, kind of the sweetheart of college football this year. It's a Manning, and everybody loves the Mannings. They're obviously personalities that people are big fans of. If you'd ask Dalton, he'd say, I'm Manning all the way. So Dalton, obviously, big time fan of the Mannings. And of course, Arch is getting hyped up like he is that good. I think there's a world where he is, but we'll figure out more as the year goes on. Looking at the offense for the Texas Longhorns, Arch Manning at quarterback, he potentially can be the guy. All he has to really do is be better than Quinn Ewers, and I think there's a lot of ability for him to be able to do that. Again, he was one of the most highly touted freshman quarterbacks ever. Then you look at this receiving core, and this is kind of the thing that makes me the most excited for this team is I really love Ryan Wingo. I think along with Jeremiah Smith and Ryan Williams, who are both really, really awesome freshman receivers, Ryan Wingo was in that conversation of being really good too. He isn't as good as those two guys, but man, he'll get a shine this year as the star receiver. But I'm also a big fan of Emmett Mosley. I do think he has a lot of ability. He's also younger and can play with this roster. So again, we'll kind of figure out what that team can do with those guys. But obviously, one of the biggest talking points, Julio, is this running back room, which has a lot of potential.
All right, first off, you got Quintravion Wisner, and he had 226 carries for 1,064 yards and five rushing touchdowns last year and about 5 yards a carry. And then, of course, you have CJ Baxter, who had 138 carries for 659 yards and five rushing touchdowns, averaging about 5 yards a carry. They
Yeah,
have an elite backfield.
yeah, and of course Baxter was going to be the guy last year probably, faces the injury, doesn't get a play, so those stats from 2 years ago, and that was in a running back room that also had a pretty good running back, we'll say. And again, Quintravion Wisner, like you said, also brings the ability to catch passes for them. And it will be good to be able to kind of get one back in the game, let him take some snaps, get the other one in the game, and it allows your running backs to be healthier as the season goes on, and that's obviously a position that gets beat up on a lot. Then we go look at this defense, and this is probably the thing to talk about when you talk about Texas, and it may be the thing to talk about on the other side as well. But looking at Texas, Colin Simmons has an argument for the best edge rusher in college football. Anthony Hill has an argument for the best linebacker in college football. Michael Taff is sick as a safety on the back end. Made a ton of big time plays for them last year. Malik Muhammad is awesome on the back end. There is just a litter of names on this list that you know from last year's team that have returned. And again, Colin Simmons and Anthony Hill kind of headline that group as potentially two of the best players in college football. That is what makes this team so scary. That's what makes them the number one team on paper this season. Moving over to Ohio State, and when you talk about a group of players that can make anybody look good, what will this receiving core make Julian Sayin look like? Julian Sayin getting his opportunity to play quarterback at a big time university as a technically freshman, as a redshirt freshman, which is incredible. I mean, it is. For him to be playing at that young with the ability to step in and be the guy for the next 2 to 3 years at Ohio State, that is a huge role to take on. But also, he is throwing to, you're talking about Carnell Tate, who is a likely first round pick in this upcoming draft. Jeremiah Smith, who probably will be the number one pick in the 2027 NFL draft, and Brandon Ennis, who's very good and also going to be overshadowed by how good the other two guys are. And then on top of that, you talk about this running back room, which had to replace two NFL running backs, and they go grab a senior transfer and then have a sophomore who's set up to be a potential starter as well. It is obviously a great problem to have when you got to play with a bunch of new players and they're all this good. Julio, talk about these running backs.
You got James Peoples, who last year had 49 carries for 197 yards on 4 yards a carry and two touchdowns. He was also behind Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. And then you have C.J. Donaldson from West Virginia, who had 163 carries, 734 yards, 11 rushing touchdowns, and 4.5 yards a carry.
Yeah, and this guy is a bruiser. CJ Donaldson will run through your face. That is the kind of running back that he is, and maybe that's the 1-2 combo you get with those two guys. Is one is running up, the outside of the numbers, and the other one is running right down your throat down the middle. And if they have that combo going with this receiving core, uh, Julian Sayin just has to be an average quarterback, and this team is going to be really good this year. And then I didn't even mention Max Clare at tight end, another name I have to say because I love him a ton too. I think it was a really good get in the portal, an incredible tight end that can maybe even be better than anything they've had in a while at the tight end position. And then, of course, just a fun name. You have to mention that they have a Bo Jackson right now. I mean, what the heck are the odds of that they have Bo Jackson on this roster? So we'll see if he brings anything as a freshman playing for them. Of course, you go over and look at this defense. Some of the big names returning. Sonny Styles, one of the best linebackers in the entire country, if not the best. You're talking about two teams that have an argument to have the best running back in the country, or linebacker, I should say, in the country. And then you talk about the best player in the country, in my personal opinion, and Caleb Downs. And this kid is unreal. We're talking about a safety that can go in the top five of the NFL draft. That's how good he is. And I don't know the last time that there was a safety that good because safety is such a devalued position in college football now. It's unreal. He really is that good. He can return kicks. We saw him return a punt last year for a touchdown. He can play the best secondary ball in all of football potentially. This is a guy that literally can move into the NFL and maybe be a top 10 safety. Probably is a guaranteed top 10 safety, and that's how talented he is. So it's unreal that they have this much talent on this roster. And again, you were a national championship team last year for a reason, and that's because of the depth on the overall roster. Going to make a pick here, Julio. Probably the hardest game to pick on the slate. It is easily probably the most watched game on the slate, and it's going to be a 12 o'clock noon kickoff. Julio, who you got here?
In a very close game, give me Texas. I think this is going to be I don't really think it's going to be a shootout. I think this is going to be more of like a 24 to like 21 type of game. I don't think there will be points scored, but it won't be a 45-41 type of game. It'll be a
Yeah.
24-21.
Yeah, and I'm kind of on the same wavelength with you. I do think this will be a little bit lower scoring. You're talking about two of the best defenses in the country. I'm looking at just purely situation. who is in the best situation in their first legit college football snaps, and to me, it's Julian Sayin. And I don't necessarily think he's better than Arch Manning. I actually think Arch Manning will probably be better than Julian Sayin. But when I'm talking about week one, who do I trust the most? I'm going to side with Ohio State here. The only reason I side with them, first of all, big part of that is they're playing in Ohio. They're not playing in Texas. And I think that home field advantage is going to be a big, big deal for this game. But also, when you look and compare talent on these rosters, I mean, they're here, man. They're that even when it comes to talent. So if I'm going to take anything over anything, it's going to be I have the two best players in the entire country on one team, and that's Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs at Ohio State, and that just barely pushes it over the edge. But like you said, I think this will be a very, very close game and probably will be lower scoring due to how good the defenses are. Moving on to our next game here, we got the Alabama Crimson Tide on the road against the Florida State Seminoles. Of course, a team last year that was terrible, to say the least. They were one of the worst teams in college football, one of the worst teams in a power conference. I do expect a bounce back this year, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens when we go dive into these two rosters. First of all, going to start off with your roster here, Julio, and I'll just go ahead and let you do the talking, and I'll add on after.
All right, first we have our offensive line, and we have probably one of the best offensive lines in the country behind Caden Proctor, who is probably going to be a top three pick, most likely. And we have Ryan Williams, who is the second best receiver in college football behind Jeremiah Smith. Jeremy Bernard, who is a great two, and Isaiah Horton, who is just as good as Jeremy Bernard. And at running back, Jam's going to be out a few weeks, but there are some questions about Richard Young, and it's gonna be fun to watch him. But I think he'll be fine against Florida State. I mean, it's going to be a good game.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that their offensive line kind of headlines what can be a really good roster this year. You're talking about Parker Brailsford, who I've heard you mention plenty of times. This is a kid that could maybe be a first round pick as a center, and that does not happen very often. Caden Proctor, like you said, a potential top three pick, top five pick, going to be protecting the blind side for a brand new quarterback. So we'll see how that works out for them. And then, like you said, the receiving core obviously is expected to be pretty good this year. It did improve. I think Isaiah Horton is a good piece to go out and get. He was playing with a really good quarterback last year. We'll see if he can get that kind of quarterback play out of Ty Simpson, which I think is really, really important for this roster this year. I kind of think that's the make or break thing when it comes to winning a championship is how good is Ty Simpson. If he's just an average quarterback, I think that this team, talent wise, is already good enough to be in the conversation for a playoff and maybe even make a run there. But if he's really good, then they can talk about winning what they want to win, which is the final goal. Then you go over and look at this defense, and of course, I'll start us out here. I know you have a little bit you want to talk about in the secondary, so I'll talk about this defensive line a little bit. LT Overton, big time piece coming off the edge on one side, and of course it's kind of interesting with the positions that they have to see what they'll do off the other edge. Last year at times we saw some of their better players playing linebacker shift down and rush the quarterback. So we'll see what they do that if they do that again this year. Deontay Lawson, of course, being probably the most important piece on this defense, who is a guy that could have went to the NFL if he wanted to, and does return due to some injury problems. Julio, talk about this secondary, which is probably one of your favorite parts about this team.
Oh yeah. Damani Jackson is arguably one of the best cornerbacks in college football, and you got Bray Hubbard, who is a top three safety in college football, and then you have Keon Sabb, who is a transfer from Michigan last year, and he stepped up big piece because we lost uh, Caleb Downs, who is the best defensive player in college football, and he played his role very well. And then you have Zabian Brown, he's a stud as a freshman last year. He won us the Georgia game with that pick.
And last but not least, we have to talk about this punter for Alabama. And this is probably the most fun part we've had with this podcast. We were just digging at the rosters and kind of looking at their players. And we found out that Blake Dowd, the punter for Alabama, is a 6'5" punter who had a almost 1,000 yard season in high school. He only averaged 35 yards per punt in high school. So he goes to the Colorado School of Mines and is there for his whole entire college career and then averages 47 yards per punt last year at the Colorado School of Mines. And he's now playing for Alabama. I mean, that is probably the single craziest story you'll probably ever hear. And it's a story he'll tell his kids is like, I was playing receiver in high school and kind of sucked at punting. Went to
Yeah.
the College of Mines, and now I'm playing at Alabama on the big stage in a week one matchup with Florida State. And I will probably have to punt at least once in this stadium. And I was punting for the School of Mines.
I think Alabama's gonna have, and you know what? If Alabama fan comes after me after this, I think we might have one of the worst special teams in college football. I'm just gonna say it here. I'm just gonna say it. We probably have the worst special teams in college football.
That is a position that they have so much talent everywhere else they can kind of ignore some of the special team stuff. Moving on to the other side with the Florida State Seminoles, and of course, this is a roster that had to have a complete turnover. They were completely down in the dumps, I guess would be the best term to use last year. There was talks about firing their coach. There was talks about this roster just isn't very good, and it looked on paper like it was going to be awesome. Again, they had transfers coming in, one of the better transfer classes, and none of those players worked out. DJU being the big issue, of course, at quarterback. This year, look at their quarterback position. They have Thomas Castellanos. And again, Thomas Castellanos at Boston College last year was a heavy rusher, but he also has some ability to pass the ball. He kind of reminds you of a Kyler Murray when it comes to just his size and the way he wants to play, which is, of course, getting out and using his legs. And then, of course, I'll obviously let you talk about this running back, who you obviously know pretty well. But I'll first dive into this receiving core, which had some really big improvements in the transfer portal. Going out and grabbing Squirrel White, who, again, he didn't have the season he wanted at Tennessee last year. All the Tennessee fans would tell you that. But this guy has talent. There is a clear value in him because he was a guy that was expected to go to the NFL after last season at Tennessee. And this transfer happens because his quarterback leaves, and I think part of that was planned. He knew that that was going to happen, so he hit the portal and got out of there. But part of it also is he needed kind of a fresh start before he goes to the league and tries to take his shot there. And then of course they have freshman star Javon Boggs, who knows what he can do, but we've seen freshmen in the past, especially last season, be big time contributors. And then of course I like Deuce Robinson. I think he's a really good receiver. He definitely has a lot of ability, and if this offensive line is good and they can protect Castellanos, we might have something here in Florida State that they did not have last year. But Julio, I'll give you the runway and let you talk about these running backs.
You obviously have Roydell Williams from Alabama. Last year, he had 26 carries for 53 yards and two touchdowns, and I'm about 90% sure he was hurt. But when he was at Alabama, he had 111 carries, 560 yards, 5 yards per carry, and five rushing touchdowns at Alabama. And then your RB2 is Gavin Sawchik, and he had 39 carries for 128 yards and one touchdown and averaged about 3 yards a carry. But in 2023, he had 120 carries for 744 yards, nine rushing touchdowns, and averaging about 6 yards a carry.
Yeah, and he's one of the fastest running backs in college football. Obviously, this is a statistic I get from the college football game because of how much I played it. But he was the fastest running back on release in college football 25. I believe he's one of the fastest in college football 26. He come in at a 98 speed for a running back. He was quite overpowered in the game, but also if you watched him in real life 2 years ago, that was part of his game. His dynamic ability to get out and make plays. Will he have that again? I think injuries kind of pushed him down the depth chart and kind of hurt his season last year. But they're taking shots on two guys that have real upside in this running back room. And of course, if Castellanos' ability is there with his rushing, it could be kind of fun to watch this team run the ball a lot this upcoming season. And then you dive down and look at their defense, and this is kind of a litany of different things. You've got transfers here and there, you've got young players and two sophomores playing on the back end of their defense. But again, the biggest thing would be how many transfers they brought in to try to change this roster around, and then maybe try to keep Norvell's job for this upcoming season. And this is definitely one way to start it with a really difficult game against the Crimson Tide. Going to make our picks here. Julio, we all know where you're going, so I'll start us off, and I'm going to be on your side here. I think Alabama comes in here, and I do think they actually get a little bit of a scare in the first half. Some of that just being the first game of the season, some of that being a brand new quarterback, and some of that being that I think Florida State isn't terrible. I think this roster on paper looks better than last year's. I think their quarterback play will be better than last year's, and they have a really good home field advantage. It's one of the best in college football. It is definitely one of the best in the ACC, and it will be rough for Bama to come in here, especially with the expectations being really high. But I do think they'll end up coming away with a win here, and probably the second half will look more like what they want in this game, and maybe that first half gets a little scary, but Bama pulls away. Julio, what's your thoughts here?
I think this is going to be a tough game in Doak, but I think Alabama's going to win this one convincingly. The first half, that like you said, they might struggle because I mean it's your first game. You're not gonna. I mean they could come out firing, but I think just Ty's going to get used to the offense, and I think the second half it'll probably be the end score will probably be something like 34-17.
Going over to our next game here, and of course, we talked about big time games, and we said Texas Ohio State was number one. This is probably number two. You're talking about two preseason national championship favorites, just like Ohio State and Texas. And of course, this big of a game in week one is awesome. And this is obviously the biggest talking point is which Death Valley is better? Because of course Clemson calls that their stadium. LSU says the same, and LSU's been calling it Baby Death Valley. We're going to Baby Death Valley to play, and I will see how Clemson handles them. And in that situation, if the locker room is a little fired up about that from the LSU side. First of all, we will start with this LSU roster, who, again, this is one of your Heisman contenders. This is a guy where I picked Klubnik on the other side of this game. This is a guy that was finishing number two for me. And Garrett Nussmeier, the senior quarterback who is a very, very good passer, one of the best in college football, should throw for over 4,000 yards again this season, and has a really good receiving core. Again, I like Chris Helton, Aaron Anderson being the star of this receiving core, and then, of course, Xavier Thomas. I think he's going to have a really good season. I expect a lot out of him. And I do think that, again, this running back room is kind of interesting too, because we saw some flashes last year from that young freshman in Caden Durham, who's now a sophomore. Julio, if you want to talk about them and how they could change the game for LSU.
First, you got Caden Durham, who had 140 carries for 753 yards with six touchdowns, averaging about 5 yards a carry last year.
Yeah, and of course, he had a really good freshman season. It's a guy that we expect more out of this season. Of course, he faced a couple little injuries and got nicked up here and there, but if he can come out this season and be the kind of guy that they expect him to be, maybe he adds a dynamic part to this offense that they need with the super real. I mean, obviously one of the best passing attacks in the country. Then you go down and look at this defense, and of course they return a lot of guys that were supposed to be NFL players that just didn't have the seasons they wanted to have. Harold Perkins Jr. being one of those names who is a projected first-round pick in some mock drafts, just didn't have the season he wanted to have. Whit Weeks, of course, playing down here at LSU, going to be really good this year. Expect a lot out of him. And one of the biggest names on this defense, and Jack Pyburn, who transfers over from Florida, was one of Florida's best edge rushers, can come in and be a big-time difference maker for them at the edge rusher position. And then, of course, you look at their secondary. A name that sticks out is Mansour Delane, who played at Virginia Tech last year. He had a really bad first game of the season, but after that, man, he locked in and was a really good corner, so that's why he got paid the big bucks to go down here to LSU. Moving over to the Clemson side of the ball, and the first thing to talk about is mine and yours Heisman Trophy winner in Cade Klubnik. This is a guy that can separate himself from the rest of the country when we talk about quarterbacks, can be the number one draft pick in next year's class, and can very easily become one of the best Clemson quarterbacks we've seen, of course, building on last year's successful season. And then you look at his receiving core, and that's how he's going to do it. He returns all three receivers from his receiving core last year, and Antonio Williams, Bryant Westco Jr., and TJ Moore. TJ Moore, first of all, is a complete freak of an athlete. He is a massive receiver. He is also another one of those guys that was a part of a freshman class last year that may go down as one of the best receiver freshman classes ever in the history of college football. But again, I expect a ton from this unit right here, which is a group of guys that have all played together. But the big question mark for this football team, Julio, is what will they do at running back? You've got that over there.
That first they have Adam Randall, who had 16 carries for 155 yards and two touchdowns, averaging about 10 yards a carry. And they have David Eziomume, and he had 10 carries for 62 yards. This is a not proven backfield. They're obviously going to be great passing, but you're just going to have to see.
Yeah, we'll figure out what this rushing attack can do. That kind of would be the key for this team. Of course, I'm expecting them to be able to do something because I have them picked as my national champion at the end of the year. And maybe we see Gideon Davidson, the freshman, come in and maybe he can be a difference maker in a what is already not proven backfield for the Clemson Tigers. Then you go down and look at this defense, and we talk about top players in the country and top players on defense. They arguably have three of the top players in the country as well. TJ Parker, Peter Woods, Sammy Brown, really good on defense as well. And then you look at this secondary, which is loaded with talent. Again, this is a team that had not used the transfer portal before this year. This year they go out and add depth. They go out and add pieces in the portal that can be difference makers. That only will make this Clemson football roster even better than it already was. Now we go to make our pick. And again, we're talking about Death Valley Senior and Death Valley Junior, as LSU wants to call it. But of course, Clemson today, or when they play, will lay their claim to being the Death Valley, as I think the Clemson Tigers will take their first massive win of the season on path to potentially a undefeated national championship run, which is something I may be predicting in the future. But I like the number 4 Clemson Tigers. Julio.
I would like to say, yeah, I agree. This is going to be a great game. This is going to be just maybe better than the Texas Ohio State game. I think Klubnik's going to have that game that maybe they look back in December and they're like, this is why he won the Heisman.
Yeah, again, they talk about Heisman moments all the time. That's one of the things that they mention when they bring up who wins a Heisman is who had the best Heisman moments. That sometimes can be the deciding factor. And I think a pretty big Heisman moment would be, hey, you outplayed the other guy in the first game of the season, and that definitely could be something on his resume when it comes time. Moving on to our next game here, and again, the third of our 3 top 10 matchups to start the season is the Notre Dame Fighting Irish going to play the Miami Hurricanes in what has been a house of horrors for them. They have struggled playing against Miami, especially in Hard Rock Stadium, interesting enough. Going over to look at this roster, the name that kind of pops off for you is Jeremiah Love. I mean, that is the super stud. That is the guy that I'll let you talk about in just a second, who is the difference maker if this team returns to a national championship game like they did last year. But of course, the guy that has to be good for them is C.J. Carr, quarterback, who's been announced as the confirmed starter. And again, he really does have a lot of upside. He is a young guy who is going to be the complete opposite of what they had last year. He will throw the ball a lot. He is more of a statue in the pocket. Riley Leonard, of course, more of a take the ball and carry it for 15, 20 times a game, and that's going to be a different system. But I do think it can work out this year because this receiving core I think is really fun. First of all, you got your returners and Jaden Greathouse and Jordan Faison. If you remember how good Greathouse was in the playoffs last year, his name really came up in that playoff run that they made. But the big time get is Virginia transfer Malachi Fields, who is really good. This was one of the best players in the ACC last year in general. Playing at Virginia, of course, he got out of there because that was a terrible experience. And now he's down here at Notre Dame where he can be a difference maker on a potential national championship level football team. But Julio, all that to be said, who's the superstar of this football team?
Jeremiah Love, and he had 163 carries for 1,125 yards, 17 rushing touchdowns, averaging about 7 yards a carry, and could be a threat out of the backfield as well. And then you have Jadarion Price, who had 120 carries, 746 yards, 7 rushing touchdowns, and 6 yards a carry.
Yeah, we're talking about a backfield that combined for nearly 1,800 yards from their running backs, and then another, I don't know, 400 or 500 from Riley Leonard. So their whole entire identity last year was we're going to run the football down your throat. I think they could do the same exact thing this year, but have a better passing attack. That's why this team is very scary to me. A team that's kind of flying under the radar because they don't know how good CJ Carr is going to be. But man, they return a lot of production. They return a lot of ability on their offense. They also added. They got a better receiver than they had last year. They also, of course, they returned the most important piece in Jeremiah Love. And I do think Jadarion Price, if even if he doesn't get to show how good he is this year, and he really already showed how good he was last year, wait until next year when he's the senior halfback and Jeremiah Love hits the NFL. That is so exciting for them to have him. And again, you go down and look at their defense. They did lose a lot of pieces here. This was a group that got kind of hurt by pieces going to the NFL, and that will change what they have out there on the field. But at the same time, they were able to replace some players with some transfers that can be some difference makers. Of course, both of us have a transfer actually on here. Jalen Stroman transfers over from Virginia Tech, looking to be a depth safety and potentially play for them. And then Devonta Smith transfers over from Alabama and will be starting for them at the nickelback position. So they do add depth in the secondary, and they have a lot of pieces on this defense that, not necessarily all proven pieces, but they have played big time football at other universities and, of course, can come in and make a difference for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Moving over to the Miami Hurricanes, and the name that obviously sticks out here is Carson Beck. It is which version of Carson Beck do you get? Do you get 2 years ago Carson Beck, who was one of the best quarterbacks in the country and the projected number one overall pick in the NFL draft? Or do you get the Carson Beck that played last year with a hurt arm and very poor decision making? A lot of bad decisions that cost them games. They do need this version of Carson Beck to be the other one in 2023, who obviously, if he comes around and does what he did then, they could be really good this season. And then we look at this receiving core. Of course, it is a lot of talent gone. And of course, that's going to happen when you lose your quarterback to the NFL. You lose one of your receivers to the NFL. I think maybe actually two receivers to the NFL. And the other one hits the portal and goes over to Alabama. So there's a lot of moving pieces. They're going to be playing with a lot of new guys. But of course, one of the pieces that does return for them is their backup running back and Mark Fletcher. Julio, if you want to talk about that running back room.
He had 112 carries for 607 yards, 9 rushing touchdowns, averaging about 5 yards a carry in a very pass-heavy offense last season.
Yeah, extremely.
And you have Jordan Lyle, who had 54 carries for 400 yards, 4 touchdowns, averaging about 7 yards a carry.
Yeah, and of course, another name to be mentioned on this list of running backs here is Charmar Brown, coming over from North Dakota State. Was also a very dynamic runner there. Kind of listed deeper on their depth chart, on the depth chart we're currently looking at. But there's a world for me where Charmar Brown becomes the starter. That's how good he was at North Dakota State. He can be a difference maker. Me and Dalton did cover them in a game last year coming down the stretch. So it would be really fun to see how they use this backfield and maybe they can produce a lot of rushing yards on what overall is a pretty good offensive unit. Then we look down at this defense. The name that sticks out the most is Reuben Bain. Reuben Bain Jr. is the potentially the best edge rusher in the country, one of the best edge rushers in the country for sure. He can be a real difference maker getting after anybody's quarterback. And then one of the biggest things about this team that has to be fixed, if it is not, this team will be just another team that scores a bunch of points and loses games. That is the secondary. This is all replaced. This is all transfers except for, of course, a sophomore returner on the outside. They have to fix this issue. Cam Ward, if he didn't throw for 1,000 yards in a game, they lost. That can't happen this year. It can't. If you're going to win football games, you just have to be able to stop teams. We'll see if the portal moves that they made are able to get them some wins this upcoming season. Playing in Hard Rock Stadium, which doesn't really seem like a home environment, but again, Notre Dame has struggled there. Julio, who are you taking in this one?
I'm going to take Notre Dame. I think Jeremiah Love's going to have over 135 yards. I think he'll run for 2 or 3 touchdowns, and I think their passing attack they're going to show, some light that, with Malachi Fields, who is a stud at Virginia.
Yeah, again, I like this team a lot. I'm really high on Notre Dame. I think they're kind of not talked about enough as a team. I think if CJ Carr is just solid, man, this team's going to be really fun to watch. They're going to be good. They're going to run the ball extremely well, and they do have pieces on the outside that, not necessarily did Riley Leonard have those, and he took them to a national championship game. So I do expect a lot out of them, and I am going to take Notre Dame to get the big win here over the Miami Hurricanes and start the year with a big W. Going into our next game here, and this is a big one that had to be talked about because this is the start for Chapel Bill. Bill Belichick, one of the best coaches in the history of football, but of course, how will that translate over to the college football world? And then, of course, for TCU, Sonny Dykes, another really good head coach, one of the best college football coaches. And, of course, you saw what he was able to do really quickly with one really good portal class at TCU, turned them around and got them into a college football playoff. The first thing we're going to do is look at TCU's roster here. And, of course, the name that pops off the sheet for them is their starting quarterback, Josh Hoover, a guy that can be really good in the conference. Of course, Sonny Dykes has entrusted him with this offense, and he did have some success last year. You look at his receiving core, it is a group of guys that are older players, so that does help. These are guys that have experience in college football. And again, we'll kind of figure out which one separates themselves from the rest and becomes his number one target. Julio, talk about this running back in Trent Battle.
Trent Battle had 44 carries for 186 yards and 2 touchdowns last year. He didn't, I'm sure he was injured. I didn't really get a look up that much, but it could be an interesting backfield here.
Yeah, and again, they have a sophomore, Jeremy Payne, as well there. And then they have a senior transfer in Kavorian and Barnes. So it'll be interesting to see what they get out of these guys. It's a running back room that's kind of unproven. We're not exactly sure who the guy will be in this running back room. Trent Battle, of course, not having a lot of stats. But he is a senior a senior redshirt, so he was with the roster last year, and he kind of can understand the system, which will help him out, of course, moving forward. Looking down at this defense, this is a unit that I talk about age. you see seniors all across the board. Seniors at almost every position except for their edge rusher and their nose tackle. So that is interesting to see this old of a unit. Some of them, or a lot of them, being transfers. We'll see the kind of success that they can have this year. Again, I expect a lot out of Sonny Dykes and a team that maybe they push in conference play. But then we move over to the most exciting part about this game, which is just going to be Chapel Bill. What does Bill Belichick do? Does he come out and look like the same kind of guys? It is easy for him to coach college football, and we really haven't seen somebody do this at this age, 70 years old, and had the success he's had to decide to come out of retirement where he seemed to be having pretty good life, where he was getting paid pretty well to just talk football. He now has decided to come back to coaching, and UNC being the place he's at, they have kind of a dormant football program that could really explode if somebody can kind of lead them in the right direction. But first, we're going to look at this receiving core. Kobe Paysour, a guy that's returned for them that I expect a lot out of. He can kind of be the lead receiver for the new quarterback in Gio Lopez. The University of South Alabama transfer, of course, brings a lot to the table. He is a unique quarterback. He's going to be able to scramble. He can make plays with his legs, of course, with his scrambling ability, but also he's not a bad passer at all. He can sit back in the pocket and make plays. He was probably one of the better transfer quarterbacks landed by any university. So it'll be interesting to see how they use him. And again, they lost a running back in Omarion Hampton, who was arguably the second best running back in the country last season. Julio, how will Davion Gauss fix that issue?
Well, last year he had 67 carries, 326 yards, four rushing touchdowns, and averaging about 5 yards a carry. That was also under Amirion Hampton, who was one of the best backs in the country last year. And then you have Benjamin Hall, who had 29 carries, 72 yards.
Yeah, again, a guy that you don't know much about Hall transferring in, but Gauss you do know, and you know he's going to be really good. If he did that last year as a freshman behind one of the best backs in the country, there is a lot of ability in that player, and I do expect a lot out of him. He'll probably be an instant playmaker for this offense, of course, with the dynamic backfield of him and Gio Lopez. You look down at this defense. This is a defense full of transfers. This was a team that wasn't great last year on defense. They do need transfers, and if obviously, if any side of the ball, the side of the ball you think of in Bill Belichick is his defenses. They were really, really good, and he had a quarterback that kind of did things on the offensive side. If you know who that was, nobody super special. But the defenses, obviously, he was able to attract a lot of transfers. He was able to attract a lot of guys that were top tier transfers, and kind of immediately change this defense around. But going to make a pick here. A big first game. They do get to play it at home. They do have to play a TCU team that is primed to be pretty good. But I'm going to take Chapel Bill. I'm going to ride the high. I'm going to say Bill Belichick is going to get it done. And with a really light ACC schedule, which is not very difficult at all, this team could win 8 or 9 games this year. And who knows what that does to them next year and the years to come with Belichick not being there anymore. And it seems like Steve Belichick taking over as the head coach. Julio, what's your opinion on this one?
I'm going to go with you on this one. I think Chapel Bill, he's going to get his first one here, and I think it's going to be the run game, but I think Gio Lopez, he develops into being a better passer on in the game. Bill Belichick's great with quarterbacks. He had the GOAT.
Yeah, yeah, he definitely knows how to handle a quarterback and how to make them better. That is definitely something that has worked in his system before. All right, moving on to our next game here. It's Syracuse on the road in technically a road game for both teams, though, as they are the road team here, but they're both playing in Mercedes-Benz in the Aflac kickoff game. Of course, Syracuse coming off one of their best seasons that they've had in a long time. Tennessee as well, going to the playoff last year. And again, they lost their quarterback, and that's kind of the big storyline for this season is Nico Iamaleava is not returning to play quarterback for the Volunteers. And Syracuse, they sure as heck ain't getting back Kyle McCord either because he's in the NFL. So it is going to be interesting. Two teams taking over with new quarterbacks on completely different offenses. Of course, both teams like to pass the ball, but Tennessee definitely heavier on the run game. Syracuse definitely airs it out a lot. But we'll go ahead and look at these rosters and see who's going to be playing quarterback for these two teams. And the first one here is going to be Syracuse and Notre Dame transfer Steve Angeli playing quarterback for them this season. You don't really know what to expect out of Angeli. He didn't start at Notre Dame. He didn't really play much. He did have some opportunities here and there, but of course, I don't really think Syracuse knows what they're getting out of him. They're just kind of expecting the talent to come in and be a decent level at least. because, of course, he was at Notre Dame. And then you look at this receiving core. They lost pieces here. They lost one of their best receivers to the transfer portal to go over to Penn State. And you see, again, Jonte Cook, kind of the headliner here, transferring in for them. But Justice Ross Simmons can be good, as well as Daryl Gill. But obviously, it's going to be interesting to see how this team handles losing their quarterback, running back, and just the overall system, also including their stud tight end, Runde Gadsden, going to the NFL. Julio, what do you think the plan will be at running back here?
They have Yasan Willis, who had 36 carries for 160 yards and one rushing touchdown and averaged about 3 yards a carry last year. And they have Will Nixon, who had 19 carries, 76 yards in 3 games before suffering a season ending injury last year. But in 2023, he played for Washington, had 33 carries for 201 yards and one rushing touchdown.
Yeah, and again, so maybe you get something out of Will Nixon being an older player that did play at Washington. Of course, he wasn't the starter there either, but he was a rotation back, and it did seem that they were going to use him in their system a little bit last year before he faced that injury. Of course, with Yasin Willis, he was a freshman last year, was able to contribute a little bit for that team, but not much. He probably steps in and takes over the lead role for this team this year. It'd be interesting to see what they get out of him in their rushing attack. Moving down to the defense, it is, again, a load of transfers. That's kind of what college football is. But you see a lot of older players surrounding this freshman and Demetrius Samuel Jr. That's going to be interesting to see what he can do for this team. They obviously expect a lot out of him if he does make the start for this team. Again, this is just a projected depth chart. But again, who knows? Might get a freshman on the field for Syracuse. Would be a fun piece for them to watch when they play this game at 12 o'clock on Saturday. And then, obviously, the team that Julio does not want to talk about, so I'll probably do a lot of the talking here when we look at the Tennessee Volunteers. A completely different team in general. They have changed at every single position of pretty much, other than Chris Brazzell returning at receiver, who is probably one of the bigger pieces they do return because he's pretty good. He definitely has a dynamic ability to him, and there was some rumors that he might leave them because of the transfer of Nico, but he sticks around, and I really respect that out of a guy, not just dipping out of there because a quarterback leaves, and sticks around with his team and has some loyalty to them. Mike Matthews, of course, at the X receiver, and Braylon Staley, redshirt freshman, playing in the Y spot. But again, this is a team that who knows what they're going to get out of their quarterback. This is Joey Aguilar's chance. He is going to show either he belongs at the power level, where he was kind of basically a trade for Nico, where he went from UCLA to Tennessee, and Nico goes from Tennessee to UCLA. But Joey Aguilar was the starter at Appalachian State. And if you know, Appalachian State has had some success over recent seasons and in their past. But they were pretty solid with him under center, and maybe he does some stuff for them this year that puts them back in that talk because their offense doesn't have to be insane for them to have a good football team because the defense is definitely what we want to talk about. But Julio, I'll let you get in on these running backs here.
They have Deshaun Bishop, who had 74 carries for 455 yards, as well as three rushing touchdowns and 6 yards a carry. And he was behind Dylan Sampson last year, who was a stud.
Yeah.
And then RB2 is Star Thomas, who was a transfer from Duke, who ran for 871 yards on 213 carries, averaging about 4 yards a carry, and had 7 touchdowns last year.
Yeah, and again, Star Thomas is a big get for them. This is a guy that I expect will be a difference maker for this offense. And of course, Deshaun Bishop kind of has the continuity of already being in this offense and running plays with this team, this unit. And then, of course, one of the biggest things to mention is they have him listed as David Sanders, a freshman coming in and starting over at right tackle. We'll see how he handles things early on if that is the case. And that's definitely an interesting twist to an offensive line that is having to replace some pieces from last year's team. Moving down to their defense, and this is a unit that is tops in the country. This is one of the better defenses, probably a top 10 defense. They are replacing their edge rushers, and that's a very difficult thing to do because you're replacing a guy that goes to the league, and you're replacing an interior defensive lineman who hits the league. And they were both pretty good players, one of them being a first round pick. It'd be interesting to see what they do down there. But then you dive into this secondary and including this linebacking core, and you're seeing a ton of returning talent here. And Arian Carter at linebacker, and Jermon McCoy at corner, and of course Boo Carter, a guy that even Dalton himself said he thinks that Boo Carter might play a little bit of offense and defense, potentially doing that two-way thing, which it's really difficult to do that. And there's not a lot of players that can do that. But if he has that ability, it'd be really cool to watch. And that maybe is something that helps them get over the edge this year in some games is Boo Carter doing some special things on both sides of the ball. Then we go to making the pick here, Julio. And I know as hard as it is for you to pick against them, I'm going to let you pick here.
As bad as I hate to do this, I'm gonna pick Tennessee, but I really could. It could be close. I really do think it could be close.
Yeah, and again, I think that there's a chance that this is close as well. Fran Brown is a really good coach at Syracuse. Neither team gets the home field advantage. I think if they were playing down there in Neyland, it'd probably be a different story. But with that no home field advantage and just kind of being both fan bases showing up, which it will be a lot more Tennessee fans than Syracuse fans as it is in the South. Tennessee definitely a lot closer. I still think that Tennessee will walk out of here with a win. I'm on the same boat as you are. I know Dalton said he was also on that same boat here. He's expecting a good start to the season. He really just wants to see Joey Aguilar play well. That's the big thing is what will they get out of him at quarterback and what will they get out of this rushing attack that lost the most important piece to this program over the last probably 10 to 15 years. Him and Hendon Hooker. That's the two names you kind of think of with those rosters over the last 10 years. So it'll be interesting to see what they do to replace that kind of talent that leaves to the NFL. Moving on to our last game of the first week of games, and of course, this is going to be the second Aflac kickoff game taking place on Sunday at 3 p.m. I will be in attendance to this one. This is one I can't wait for. It's definitely a really fun start to the season and a really competitive start. Tech kind of gets to come out and be the underdog this year. Last year they come out and everybody was hyping them up, and they had to go play Vanderbilt, and they got beat in overtime in a tough game. This year we got to be the underdog. We got to go down there and see if we can prove something to a South Carolina team that obviously has Shane Beamer as the head coach, which is a very interesting situation as he is coaching against his father's former team, and obviously his dad is well respected amongst almost all, actually all of college football, but especially Hokies fans ourselves. First of all, dive into this depth chart for the South Carolina Gamecocks. Of course, one of the big things you see here is Lenore Sellers is back at quarterback, and he's really good. I mean, he is a very, very good quarterback. This is one of the best quarterbacks in the country. Probably one of the most dynamic, if not the most dynamic quarterback in the country. Has those Cam Newton flashes. That's kind of the comparison he gets. If you see that come out in this game, it's because Tech doesn't do very good against rushing quarterbacks sometimes. And he's probably one of the best and has the ability to show it, every single play, truthfully. Then you look at this receiving core, and this is another unit that has definitely got some kind of what are we gonna get out of them? Because Mazeo Bennett was really good last year. He definitely put on a show when he was on the field. Jared Brown coming in as a transfer senior, and then Nick Harbor. And it's always that joke you see. There's a meme that constantly runs about Nick Harbor, and it's this dude is 6'5". He runs a 4.2, maybe 4.3 if you want to say that, but I think he probably runs a 4.2. And they're all like, well, what's the major flaw? And it's like he can't catch a football. And so if he has developed his hands at all in the offseason, he's a freak. I mean, he is 6'5". Probably he's bigger than DK Metcalf. He probably weighs more than DK Metcalf, and he's faster than DK Metcalf. That is unbelievable because I don't think I'd ever said that. DK is the biggest receiver I've seen in my lifetime, maybe Calvin Johnson. This guy has that kind of size. If he can find a way to be a legitimate receiver, they get scary and they get really hard to beat. Be interesting to see what they find in him this season. And then, last but not least, one of the biggest things about this team was they had to wait and wait and wait for Rasul Faison to get cleared. He was just cleared this week to play in this game. Julio, you got anything on them?
He ran for 1,100 yards last year on about 200 attempts and had 8 touchdowns.
Yeah, again, it's a transfer that they had to get cleared because of another eligibility waiver issue. That was kind of the thing with him. And of course, you see another graduate transfer in Oscar Attaway the third. I don't know what they're going to get out of these guys because, again, I don't know much about him. But Faison was a name that they were saying to watch out for. If he got cleared, he can be a difference maker. And then last but not least, this is kind of a running back room that we don't know what's going to happen. Isaiah Gustav is transferring over from Colorado, and he actually had some solid carries at Colorado in his time there, which obviously had an embarrassing offensive line. So it's really a complete toss-up on which running back's going to get the work, but I would assume Faison being cleared will be the guy. This is the part about this team that gets scary, is you're looking at a defensive unit that if their star player in Dylan Stewart is getting after your quarterback, he is going to make it a very bad day for Kyron Drones. But if he isn't, this is a unit that replaced every piece of talent on their defense. They had a lot of guys that either graduated or went to the NFL. And when they have that much roster turnover, you don't really know what to expect out of them in week one. Tech has a really good running back room, and they have the ability to run the ball with their quarterback and running back. And again, Dylan Stewart, great at getting after the quarterback, but not necessarily as good in the rushing game. It'll be interesting to see what they can do against Tech, who probably will want to run the ball, as that's something we've always wanted to do. Moving over to Virginia Tech, you've heard me time and time again talk about this team and that they have probably less excitement for the season, but more of that underdog mentality, which I prefer. I think that's the better thing to be in is that underdog because that allows you to come out and surprise people and win games sometimes that you probably shouldn't win. Diving into this roster, you see some listings here on the offensive line. That is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be Tomas Remak at left guard, Johnny Garrett at left tackle, Kyle Altuner at center. Probably the player I'm most excited for, transfer center from West Virginia, who looks like he could easily be one of the best freshmen in the entire country. Gonna have Montavious Cunningham playing right tackle, and then we're going to see different combination of players here at right guard. But early on, it's expected to be Lath Gainem shifting over from left guard to right, as it's listed here. Then you look at the tight end position. This is a position that I'm extremely excited for. If you remember our last great tight end in James Mitchell, me and Julio had the experience of watching him up close and personal in high school. He was really, really good until he faced that knee injury. Benji Gosnell has that upside. He is an incredible tight end. When he caught the ball last year, it was plays, and you know, Julio, you were at those games. Some of the catches he made on the sideline were incredible. And when he got the opportunity, he showed out. I'm really expecting Kyron to be able to get him the ball this year. And the biggest thing for me is I love Philip Montgomery. I think the hire was phenomenal. I don't know why that wasn't the hire when we first started. I think if Pride had hired him 4 years ago, this team would be turned around. The biggest issue is he had struggling offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator positions that did not help him out at all as the head coach. And now he's got that. Kyron Drones is very excited. He has stated many times, I'm so glad I have a quarterback coaching me and not an offensive line coach coaching me because that's what our last two OCs were. We definitely have the ability to produce, and if you know Virginia Tech, when is the last time we had an offense with over 300 yards per game? I mean, we win every game by running the ball and playing defense. So it would be really cool if we had a good offense. You look at the receiving core, kind of the unproven section of this team, whereas last year that was probably our best part, other than our running back, was we had four seniors coming back to play. We have Donovan Green transfer on the outside that if he had been healthy, he'd be in the NFL right now. He is really, really good. If he can stay healthy, once again, that is the thing. Stay healthy, he can be great. Aiden Green, who showed a ton of flashes last year as a potential outside threat. Of course, his hands being one of his issues is he didn't catch some of the easier passes to catch and would make the flashy plays. We need him to catch the easy ones. And then at the slot receiver position, it does kind of seem like it's going to be Takai Heath as the original first depth chart comes out, and he's listed there. But I expect Cam Seldon to be used a lot. He has the ability to play running back, as that's what he was at Tennessee, but he also has the ability to stretch out and play receiver because of his speed. I would expect him to be used in some end arounds or maybe some quad sets where he can come on the field and just be a playmaker for Tech. And then last but not least, the hardest room to replace in the country, probably, a lot of teams have to do that this year, is the running back room. You kind of have to just go out and find somebody else because the transfers happen so much in that position. We go out and grab Terrion Stewart from Bowling Green. This is a kid that rushed for 900 yards, and he led the nation, or even the tops of the nation, in missed tackle rate. He forced a ton of missed tackles. He is a bruising up and down the field, running north and south for sure, running back. And then, of course, we brought in Braden Bennett, transfer over from Coastal Carolina, and Marcellus Hawkins, transferring from a lower level of football, I believe it was D2. And he seems to have maybe stepped up and taken the starting job, listed here as the fourth running back, but expected to maybe start. And that's really impressive because Terrion Stewart was nearly a 1,000-yard rusher. If you're expecting Marcellus Hawkins to produce more than that, it gets me excited for the season. I can't wait to see him play. I can't wait to see Terrion Stewart and also Braden Bennett, more of a pass catching back. We'll see if we have like a full on three running back system, and heck, maybe Coney gets mixed in too. There's a lot of options for Tech at the running back position. Obviously, last but not least on that quarterback spot of Kyron Drones, should have mentioned that I'm kind of passing over because I think we already know what to expect. If he's playing, this team has the ability to be a good offense, especially with the new offensive coordinator. And of course, they have the ability to win games in the ACC. It's not the hardest conference in the world, and we didn't draw Clemson. And that's really nice to get to avoid them this year and play our two hardest games probably in conference play at home. I expect a lot out of Kyron Drones. If he's healthy, this team can win games. You move down to this defense. Ben Bell on the outside had the number one pass rush win rate in college football last year. That is insane. 30% win rate in his 4 games he played before he took his red shirt so he could transfer. That is one of the biggest pieces we add, as well as James Junkum on the other edge coming over from Eastern Michigan. Going to be a shifted down linebacker who had over 100 tackles last year. So these two guys getting after the quarterback is really fun. But the interior of our defensive line might be the strongest part of our team with Kamari Copeland and Kelvin Gilliam. Kamari Copeland broke Virginia Tech's squat record. He is moving unreal weight. He said he could have squatted over 700, but the coaches stopped him. So if he can get in the interior and do that to an offensive line that has had some pieces move around, it's going to be really fun for this team. And then, of course, Kelvin Gilliam, the senior captain, who is the probably most important piece on the interior with Copeland. Then you dive into this back end of the defense where we have a lot of guys that weren't starters last year. Quentin Reddish, who had to make spot starts. Dante Lovett, who I expect a lot out of. And then, of course, our transfers in Tyson Flowers and Isaiah Brown Murray, who we're going to call for IBM from here on out because it's a good nickname, playing in that nickelback spot. And then the linebacking core of Jaden Keller and Caleb Woodson, who is currently Caleb Woodson facing some issues off the field with a problem with the law, of course, named a captain. Gets a DWI, of course, a sensitive topic, but you gotta be able to step in and fix those issues. Pry has mentioned that he will be taking away his captain status, but we'll leave it up to him to kind of earn it back. If he plays good football, especially if he does stuff off the field correctly, could earn that status back some point this season. But we do expect to have him playing this weekend. It's still kind of up in the air, but he was listed on the original depth chart, which is big for the football. But of course, hopefully the player can get things right. And again, I expect a lot out of him. He's a really good player and just kind of had a lapse in judgment. And that happens with some college students here and there. Of course, myself being a college student, I've seen it happen with some players and just people in general. So if he can get things figured out there, this team does have the ability to be really good on defense. And that's kind of the most fun part about Tech teams sometimes is their defense. And Sam Cephas coming in from the NFL level uses a lot of safeties. So as you can tell, we have a ton of safeties. This was one of the biggest transfer additions we had was the safety room. That is about it for these two teams. You're looking at two rosters that are really fun. Of course, Julio, I'll let you open up here and make a pick between Tech and South Carolina.
I think this is going to be, some people are going to be like, well, it's going to be a blowout. South Carolina's the number 13 team in the country, and Tech was this and this last year. Well, I think honestly, it comes down to if Kyron Drones can, play at the ability he can. I think this could be a great game, but I think South Carolina's going to come out and win this football game.
Yeah, and again, like you said, this is a game that people, I mean, the ESPN predictor does have it pretty heavily in their favor. But if you go look at sports books and betting, because this line is so close, it's interesting. It's a 7.5 point line that I don't think a lot of people would say. But again, we're kind of that underdog team that has the ability to come and surprise somebody. It's a brand new offense. It's a brand new defense. It's a lot of transfers. It's really going to be a different football team than it was last year. So you don't have a lot of tape on this roster. But I myself did pick Tech to win a lot of games last year because I thought they had the ability to do that. I think this team can be really good again this year, but I do think they drop an early game here to South Carolina. The number 13 team in the country for a reason. They are good. Here's the thing I want to say. As a Tech fan going to this game, I hope and pray we win this one because what a start it would be. What a get a big time win on a big time stage on national television. What it would do for your football program, what it would do for your coaching staff who struggled in those close games, and what it would do for the fan base who needs to be revived after what has been a pretty rough stint, especially after Justin Fuente. I expect that they come in here and compete. And again, I'm not going to be super upset if we come in here and lose by a field goal at the end of the game. Not because of losing at the end of the game, that's going to suck. But it's going to be that they competed and they showed up and played against an SEC school who you've had legitimate concerns against. If Alabama plays them later in the year in South Carolina, if Tech can go on the field and put on a good product and play them in a close game, I'd be very excited for the rest of the season and what they can do with the schedule that they have. But I am going to have South Carolina winning this one in a very close game. And again, it sucks to lose a one-score game, but I do think it'll be close, probably 3 to 7 points. South Carolina takes it. Again, thank you guys so much for joining us this week. It is the first week of college football games. That is not technically week 0, but week 1, we dove into these 10 games. Of course, like I said before, we have 3 top 10 matchups. That's really fun. We have Tech's big game. We have a big game for you as a Bama fan. And of course, we have a big game for Dalton as a Tennessee fan. So there's a lot going on. We do see all our teams featured on this week's picks. And of course, I had a lot of fun with this one. Obviously, I'm pulling for the Hokies all day, every day. I hope we win. But being a realistic fan, I think that there's a world where we can lose that game. That's one of those teams that it is really scary to play early on. And if they get things going, they can beat us. But man, I'm telling you right now, my heart said take Virginia Tech as it would tell me every time, and I'll definitely be excited if we can pull that one off. Julio, you got any closing remarks for this pod?
Hopefully we can shut Thomas Castellanos up and, get a dub this weekend. But anyways, peace, roll tide.
Yes, sir. I think y'all probably will handle business down there, as you saw. I picked them in that one. Also, like I said before, I appreciate you guys so much for joining us. Again, it does a lot for the channel to show what you guys like. Helps if you leave a comment, and if anything else, leave a like, subscribe, follow along. It helps the channel a ton, puts it out there more. We'll expect to have Dalton back at some point soon. Wasn't feeling the best tonight, but hopefully we get him on here next week. When we get back on next week, of course, we'll have the potential to cover some more games and the analysis video that will come out probably, I'm not 100% sure. My last will come out on Tuesday, but we'll try to get it out on Monday or Tuesday of next week covering these games. But again, I am so excited. This is it. We're finally kicking off into the full slate of college football. And the big story, of course, Lee Corso's last college game day will be the GOAT of college game day, finishing up his pretty historic career. And obviously, if we talk about things that got me into sports media, college game day is one of them. I love that so much. It's probably, not probably, it is the best sports show out there. It brings everybody that likes college football together because it is so fun to watch the picks, especially. What do you think inspired this podcast? What do we do in this podcast? We make picks. And part of that was me growing up watching that show. And so Corso retiring is definitely something really, really cool to watch. It is a send off to a legend of college football. So I'm really excited for that too. And of course, like I said before, if you guys enjoyed, like, subscribe, follow along, and peace.